I'm sure you have all heard the news that Sweetheart's Conversation Hearts, a candy that America loved or loved to hate, won't be in stores this Valentine's Day. You know what I'm talking about, the little hearts on the cover of your order of worship. Of course, its maker, the New England confectionery company, Necco, went bankrupt last May and was sold in an auction. Now, there are a lot of knockoffs to these conversation hearts, but as one reporter put it, after 116 years as America's confectionery currency of affection, sweethearts are no more. L-U-V-U-R-I-P. So tragic. Now, as candies go, sweethearts were less than delicious, in my opinion. Chalky, dusty, I don't even know what flavor they were. But of course, they weren't known for their flavor. They were known for their 1 to 2 word messages, right? Love you, smile, be mine. Now, they actually traced their lineage to Massachusetts in the 1860s. At that time, lozenges were a popular way to deliver medicine, but they were exhausting to produce. And so a Boston pharmacist named Oliver Chase invented this machine that would compress medicines into these little lozenges on a large scale. And so he's doing this, and one day realizes he could do this with candy, too. And he moves into the confectionery business, and it's his brother in 1866 who decided to start printing messages on the candy. Now, back in the day, sweethearts were originally a lot larger, and they were different shapes. Like you could get a postcard one, or a baseball one, or one in the shape of a watch. And some of their early messages were really direct, like things like, "How long shall I have to wait?" ? And "Please be considerate," period. Later iterations spoke to love's kind of fickle nature and also to stranger compulsions within love. All of this is cataloged in the Smithsonian, by the way. So these messages turned into things like, "Married in satin, comma, marriage will not be lasting." Sounds more like a magic 8-ball. Or this one, "Please send a lock of your hair by return mail." Now, the candy as we know it came to be in 1902. It assumed its little heart shape, and it had those little messages like "marry me" and "kiss me" and "be mine." Now, candy conversation hearts are not a definition, of course, of romantic love, even if they are a sweet symbol of it. And similarly, despite what many couples believe when they choose it for their wedding, 1 Corinthians 13 is not the definition of romantic love either. Did you know it? If you're thinking about getting married, couples, you might want to think of something perhaps from the Song of Songs if you want something romantic, right? "Listen, my beloved, behold, he is coming like a gazelle leaping over the gate and the hills." Or, "How beautiful you are, my darling, your eyes are like doves behind the veil." That's not even the juicy stuff. Just go home and read that book for yourself. You see, 1 Corinthians 13 is not a recipe for romantic love. It's an antidote to division and discord. It's not for a couple. It's actually for a community. Of course, couples are going to encounter discord in their marriages and partnerships, and so it's not that that text is completely irrelevant. It's just that the end result of this text should not be that two lovers gaze into their eyes adoringly, but rather that we are all gazing outward into the eyes of others, especially those who are different than us, and yet who still bear the divine image and imprint. In 1 Corinthians 13, Paul declares love as the greatest power in a community. And he's not quite as succinct as candy conversation hearts, but he is just as direct. You see, unlike a marriage vow moment, Paul does not introduce this passage to affirm an ethic that's already present in the community. Rather, he's presenting this passage as a way to introduce into the community an ethic that is absolutely necessary for their survival as ones that are in relationship with each other. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, lest we think that the Corinthians had it easier because it was back then, and surely communities were easier and they weren't diverse, I will remind you again that the Corinthian church was not a homogeneous body. The members were not all the same, totally different socioeconomic statuses, different professions, different genders, ages, ethnicities, life situations, married and unmarried folks, adults and children. Many members of the community were Gentile, but it also included Jews. And some of the Jews it included were powerful figures who served as synagogue leaders. Some of the members in the Corinthian community were lower class, but some sat opposite that, right, and high in rank and resources. Erastus, for example, who Paul says is a member of this community, was the city treasurer of Corinth, and Gaius had enough resources to support Paul and the whole church. There were slaves in this community and free people in the community, and people with all different skill sets and gifts, as we see Paul talk about right prior to this in chapter 12. And so, like any diverse body, for the Corinthian community, this diversity presented a lot of challenges. And really, the challenges were swallowing any hope of them experiencing the gifts of diversity. They were thick, entrenched in rivalry and discord. Members had divided into different groups. They were each siding with different teachers. It was a fragmented community. Perhaps it was a community that was open to all, closed to none on paper, but in actuality, each group in the community wanted to be open to itself and its own beliefs, but struggled to be open to those who believed differently. Now, through all this, you might expect that Paul would just say, okay, go ahead and break into your factions and be unified with those who think like you, look like you. But he remains really firm that diversity is a non-negotiable. And he says that God has called these people together at this time to be a community. And so he launches into this poetic ode to love, if you will. And it's really more of a call to action. Even though it sounds so beautiful when read at weddings, it is a hard and difficult call to actually answer. Paul could have said, all you need is love. He did not intend for the language of 1 Corinthians, though, to be something easily digested, right? The point was not to make the readers feel comfortable and affirmed in the way they love now. It really was to make them think about how they were in relationship right now, and maybe to cause some dissonance to say, if this is love and this is my behavior, do these two things match? It was meant to motivate them. And so in his tribute to love, Paul starts naming these human achievements and attributes that up until this point he had really praised in his letter to the Corinthians. Things like speaking in tongues and prophecy and knowledge, things that are key ingredients to the Christian life. He spends a lot of time in this letter talking about those things, but here he starts to say they're not as important as the people think they are. That love is the most important thing in actuality. There are many gifts, right? But one Spirit. He starts to diminish their allure, if you will. Not their importance, but maybe their importance in the sense of how the people in the community thought of themselves when they had one of these gifts, like prophecy or knowledge. And right before chapter 13, he says that love is the more excellent way. That's what they're missing. In actuality, the Greek is a little bit more direct. Instead of saying love is the more excellent way, it's translated, love is beyond measure. And the reason that is so profound is because this community was fought in this game of measuring themselves against one another. Who is smarter? Who is better? Who has the more spiritual gift? They were obsessed with this competition where to be right, somebody else has to be wrong. To be gifted and skilled in something, that means somebody else can't be gifted and skilled in that area, right? It was all passion and no humility. So love is beyond measure, he says. And he underscores the primacy of love here because it is the one spiritual resource that the Corinthians are really lacking. And I think the reason he spends so many verses unpacking exactly what love is because it's the kind of word that demands a definition, right? It's too vague and too big without one, especially in our English language. I mean, I can say I love yoga, I love pizza, and I love Damon, and hopefully those loves have different levels. Hopefully they don't mean the same thing. When we talk about love in our English language, we really have to unpack what it means. And that's what Paul is doing here. He goes into the different kinds of love, telling them what it is and what it isn't. In fact, I kind of wish all scripture passages were as clear as this. I mean, he's very direct. He says on the positive side, it's patient, it's kind, it's selfless. And in terms of what love is not, he says it's not self-seeking, not short-tempered, not offensive. In other words, love does not hurt people. It does not damage or disparage others. It does not impede affirmation of another's humanity. Love is the only means by which believers have a chance to live fully in the knowledge of God. All other spiritual achievements are limited except for love. All other things, he says at the end, will help us see and know only in part. But love is what's going to allow us to be fully seen, because love is how God sees us. It's not a fluffy kind of love. It's not a passive kind of love. One pastor says, this kind of love is an up at dawn, feet on the ground, tools in hand, working kind of love. It builds communities. It nurtures positive social interactions, not just social networks. It's a unifying love. And it's one that transcends self-imposed caste systems and personal biases. It's a love we all need, isn't it? A love that costs us something because it asks us to check our pride at the door. It asks us to maybe not see our own successes by the world's standards, but to look at the lives we are leading in terms of God's standards. And right in the middle, you get those, verses that are really packing the punch, right? Love is kind. Love is patient. All of these are action verbs. And when you read them in the Greek, instead of being passive, they say things like, love shows patience. Love acts with kindness. It's a very active kind of love, right? Again, not passive. It's about what it does for others. So when we think about this in terms of our community, it's nice to think about Corinth, but what about us today, Calvary? What does this mean for us? One lesson we could take from it is that, a lot of times I think we can see church community as a place where we want to gather with like-minded, agreeable people, right? We want to feel good when we walk in the doors. However, true love is not measured by how good it makes us feel in a community. In the context of 1 Corinthians, it would be better to say that the measure of love in a community is the community's capacity to hold tension and disagreement without division, right? Without pointing fingers, without creating shame. Can we listen to others and learn what God is speaking to us through them? Now, we aren't strangers to the kind of division in communities that Paul is talking about. I'm not really talking about Calvary here as much as I'm talking racial divisions and denominational divisions. Think about how many Baptists there are. Somebody asked me this the other day, and I was like past 10 fingers when I was explaining all the kinds of Baptists. And of course, political divisions. And all of our strategies for negotiating these divisions leave a lot to be desired, don't they? I mean, we tend to just kind of choose our camps and choose our sides and not think about the fact that there's a spectrum. There's a huge middle ground in between two poles. It might be okay if we chose our sides, but the problem is after we choose our sides, a lot of times we want to feel better about our own opinion, and so we start to disparage the other or speak against the other. But as Elias Shakur said, who was an advocate for nonviolence, he worked toward reconciliation with Arabs and Jews in Nazareth and Haifa and Galilee. He understood discord. He said, "The one who is wrong is the one who says, 'I am right.'" There's a lot to think about there. Sometimes I think we forget just how divisive the gospel can be because it's hard, right? So when we read it, it's hard for us to realize it's calling us to change our lives. So a lot of times we kind of want to sugarcoat its message, maybe boil it down to some things we can put on candy hearts, things that reflect our culture and our priorities and our beliefs. But we can't do that. It seems like it should be easy to choose love. It seems like it should be an obvious choice. Why is it so hard? Well, a Persian poet named Rumi once said, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against love." This is food for thought because it suggests that maybe what stands in the way of our loving others isn't really others. It's us. It's the way we see people. It's the way we think about our worldview. It's our own pride that keeps us from loving others because we're so conditioned to be right and to not mess up. And guess what? We're human. So we're going to not be right sometimes. We're going to mess up. And as Morgan said so well in her sermon last week, we're not always going to say the right thing the first time, but can we stay in that moment? Can we choose love instead of running away from that moment? Can we choose to learn and to become more loving instead of pulling away? I mean, in thinking about Paul's words, this verse at the very end, faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. Think about how powerful that is. You can have faith on your own, can't you? You can hope on your own. You can sit in a nice little house protected from the outside world and have your hope and faith and formulate a perfect belief system. Love is not like that. You have to have other people to practice love. You have to be in relationship with others. And it requires us to break down those barriers within ourselves. And it's messy. So, in essence, I think Paul is saying, with all of these instructions, one major theme: love takes humility. Think about the things he talks about: patience and not boasting and not always having to be right. It's giving a lot of power to this idea that maybe we need to let go of some of our power. Maybe we need to listen and be in a posture of learning. And that humility will help us learn more. He essentially says we can say all the right things and we can believe all the right things. We can study all the right things. We can volunteer for all the right activities. We can do all the right things, but it doesn't make a lick of difference if love is not anchoring it all. Right? If our intention behind that is not love. And no one's going to know that per se except you and God. It's not a romantic idea of love. It's a sweat equity proof kind of love that other people can see and feel. And when we can get into that kind of love, it does humble us. Because the more we work at love, the more we see how long we have to go. I had a great friend and colleague who posted a reflection on this passage this week. And he was talking about how, he reads this passage, of course, a lot in weddings, and he stands in front of the couple and waxes and wanes on the beauty of love and how it will nurture the couple and their relationship. And he said, in this instance, the ceremony was beautiful, the love was tangible, and everyone in attendance at the wedding was filled with joy. At least until the reception. Now, the reception was great. The food was excellent. The DJ was on point. The first dance choices were entertaining. And the cake was worth the wait. The problem was only the couple carried love beyond the church sanctuary, he said. and it was very subtle. But he noticed as he surveyed the reception hall that there were a table of people who kind of self-identified as liberals, and another table of people who kind of self-identified as conservatives, and another people who, wanted the sanctuary carpet to be green, and another table of people who wanted the sanctuary carpet to be red, and another group of people that wanted this or that. And he said, now, the problem wasn't that he thinks that wedding receptions are the place to debate partisan issues or the church's decorating committee recommendations. But what he saw was an exact image of the fellowship hall every Wednesday night in his church. That these are the tables that everybody sits at week after week after week. Everyone chose a safe table where it was easiest to love. I think what Paul is calling us here to do is to not choose the safe table. Maybe love is about choosing the table where you feel you will be maybe in the minority in some way, because that's a humbling position to be in. And everything in Paul's passionate passage about love actually points to humility. And we can't experience that, I don't think, until we're out of our comfort zones. And we realize that, we so want to be right. We so want to do the right things, and we can put so much energy and so much heart into that with all good intentions. But when push comes to shove, who are we talking to each day? Who are we seeing the divine image of God reflected back to us in? Are they people who look like us and think like us, or is there some difference there? Because we won't see God's love until we see that kind of diversity around us. Now, this Valentine's week, I think, I want you all to spend some time with a significant other, perhaps, or with a good friend, maybe with a family member, maybe with a good furry friend. It's good to express love and to have that interpersonal love that feeds us and rejuvenates us. I'm not sure I really need to challenge you to do that. You'll probably do that on your own. What I'm going to invite us to do this Valentine's week is maybe practice a different kind of love. And to do so by thinking about an area in your life where you could use some humility. So a lot of times in church, we talk about expressing love in actions, like what we're doing for others, and that's very important. But the hard work, I think, is that intention behind it and that self-work, which is very much an action, too, and can be exhausting. Think about, maybe it's something you don't want to admit to yourself, but think about an area in your life where you don't like to be wrong. I mean, you really don't like to be wrong. You like to be the expert in the room on this. Or think about an area where you always strive to be the best. Or think about an area maybe where you start to shut down when you hear somebody say a certain phrase because it triggers something in you. Whatever that thing is for you, try to sit with that this week. Listen to the words that come out of your mouth in that setting, or the words that you think you might say but don't say. Observe how you react and behave, like when you jump in too quickly and when you just withdraw. Visualize maybe a person that you disagree with or a situation where you tend to jump in or withdraw, and envision what it would look like to not insist on your own way, to be patient. And then encourage yourself in this practice, right? It's hard work, but you can do this. LOVE. Listen, observe, visualize, encourage. Short enough to be stamped on a little candy heart. Love, observe, visualize, encourage. What area in your life could you use a little humility in? That is the area where love wants to take root and grow. And we all have one of those areas. Now, if you flip to the front of your order of worship, you'll see that there's no need for you to run to Hallmark before Thursday. You have a couple of free Valentines on the cover of today's order of worship. It's like a take-home craft, right? You can take these home, cut them out, mount them on construction paper if they're a little too flimsy, and, give the little confectionery heart one to a friend, a partner, somebody who means something to you. Because again, expressing love is so very important, especially in a world that tends to express hate. The other heart, however, the other Valentine is for you. It's the words from Corinthians. It's quite comprehensive, and it requires something of you. It's scripture, after all. It's not just sugary sentiments. But you see, this Valentine, these words can be just as sweet. And in the end, they're so much more satisfying and sustaining. But we have to do the work to love, and to love all, and to love ourselves. Amen.